I am first Omticlin, and I am dead. As of this moment, we are all dead. We go into battle to reclaim our lives. This we do gladly, for we are Jem'Hadar. Remember, victory is life. This is the daily prayer of the Jem'Hadar, genetically engineered soldiers who emerge from birthing chambers, already knowing they exist only to fight and die for gods who created them as slaves. They don't eat, they don't sleep, they don't question. Born fully grown in 3 days, they live maybe 20 years before dying violently in service to the founders. They are perhaps the most tragic species in Star Trek beings created without choice, programmed with absolute faith, and denied everything that makes life worth living. Today, we're exploring the complete history of the Jem'Hadar, from their creation by the founders thousands of years ago, through their role as the Dominion's unstoppable military force, to the Dominion War that would test whether genetically programmed loyalty could ever be broken. This is the story of what happens when a species is created not to live, but to serve. To understand the Jem'Hadar, we must first understand why they were created. Thousands of years ago, the changelings, shapeshifters capable of assuming any form, began exploring the galaxy. What they found was fear. Humanoid species, whom the changelings called solids, encountered these liquid beings and reacted with terror and hatred. The changelings were persecuted everywhere they went, hunted, imprisoned, killed for being different. The experience scarred their entire species, teaching them that solids could never be trusted, that order could only be imposed through control. The changelings retreated to a rogue planet in the Almerian Nebula, where they existed in their natural state, the Great Link, an ocean of shapeshifters communing as one consciousness. There, they made a decision. They would impose order upon a chaotic universe. They would ensure that never again would changelings be at the mercy of solids. They would create the Dominion. According to Wayon, a Vorta administrator, the Dominion has endured for 2,000 years, though later claims suggest it could be as old as 10,000 years. Regardless of the exact date, the Dominion was founded by changelings who called themselves the Founders, positioning themselves as gods to the species they would create and conquer. First came the Vorta, genetically engineered from a primitive species to serve as administrators, diplomats, and commanders. Then came the military force that would make the Dominion unstoppable, the Jem'Hadar. The Jem'Hadar were created at Masan Research Station, genetically engineered to be the perfect soldiers. Everything about them was designed for combat. They were bred in birthing chambers, hatcheries, where Jem'Hadar emerged not as helpless infants, but as beings capable of reaching full combat readiness in 3 days. Within 2 weeks, they possessed the mental and physical capabilities of a human in their late teens. Their physiology was optimized for warfare. Purple or blue scaled skin, small horns on either side of their heads and around their jaws, massive physical strength. Adult Jem'Hadar didn't require sleep ever. Their bodies were engineered to function continuously without rest. They didn't need food or water. Their sole source of nourishment was white, a drug containing an isogenic enzyme and all necessary nutrients. The white was administered through vials that fit into a recessed area in the Jem'Hadar collarbone, feeding directly into their system. But here's the crucial detail. The Jem'Hadar weren't born lacking this enzyme accidentally. The founders deliberately engineered them to be dependent on white, a drug only the Dominion could provide. It was a genetic leash, ensuring that no matter how powerful the Jem'Hadar became, they could never rebel without dying. Without white, Jem'Hadar suffered horrific withdrawal. First came pain and anxiety, then loss of mental control. They would lose the ability to shroud, their natural cloaking capability that allowed them to turn invisible. Eventually, they would descend into uncontrollable violence, attacking everything around them, including each other, before their entire genetic structure collapsed and they died. The Vorta controlled the white supply, dispensing it with great ritual. This gave even physically weak Vorta absolute authority over the Jem'Hadar, who could kill a Vorta with their bare hands, but were completely dependent on them for survival. Beyond physical dependency, the founders built something even more insidious into Jem'Hadar genetics: religious programming. The Jem'Hadar were genetically coded to worship the founders as gods. This wasn't indoctrination that could be undone. It was instinct, as fundamental as breathing. Every Jem'Hadar knew with absolute certainty that the founders were gods, that serving them was the highest purpose, and that dying for them was the greatest honor. Victory is life wasn't just a motto, it was the core of their existence. Only males were bred. The Jem'Hadar had no families, no personal relationships beyond their military units, no culture or art or philosophy. They existed solely to fight, and they were very, very good at it. Jem'Hadar military organization was brutally simple. Units were ranked numerically. The first was the unit leader, the second his immediate subordinate, the third next, and so on. Rank could change instantly through battlefield promotions or demotions administered by the Vorta overseeing the unit. There were no medals, no ceremonies beyond the white distribution ritual, no glory except service to the founders. Advancement meant nothing more than closer proximity to the Vorta who commanded you. The relationship between Jem'Hadar and Vorta was complex and often hostile. The Vorta commanded the Jem'Hadar, controlled their white supply, and made strategic decisions. But the Vorta were physically weak clones, often dismissive of Jem'Hadar as mere tools. Many Jem'Hadar showed barely disguised contempt for their Vorta overseers. They were warriors commanded by administrators who had never fought, controlled through addiction rather than earned respect. The tension was constant, held in check only by genetic programming and the white dependency. Despite this, some Jem'Hadar showed surprising complexity. Ikatika, first of Dominion Internment Camp 371, refused to kill Worf when ordered by his Vorta superior, saying, "I cannot defeat this Klingon. All I can do is kill him, and that no longer holds my interest." He chose execution for insubordination over doing something he considered dishonorable. This revealed something crucial. The Jem'Hadar possessed their own sense of honor, separate from their programmed loyalty to the Founders. They respected strength and courage. They took pride in their combat prowess, and occasionally that personal honor conflicted with their orders. But these moments were rare. Most Jem'Hadar lived and died without ever questioning their purpose. They fought with fanatical devotion, capable of kamikaze attacks without hesitation. When the USS Odyssey was destroyed in 2370 by a Jem'Hadar suicide attack on a retreating ship, it wasn't desperation, it was making a point. The Dominion wanted the Federation to understand the kind of enemy they faced. The Jem'Hadar were patient in battle, but vicious in execution. They enjoyed fighting. It was literally what they were made for. And they exuded superiority over all creatures except the Founders, viewing other species as inferior beings who would inevitably submit to Dominion order. For thousands of years, the Dominion expanded across the Gamma Quadrant, conquering or subjugating hundreds of species. The Jem'Hadar were the instrument of that conquest, crushing any resistance with overwhelming force. Then, in 2369, the Bajoran wormhole was discovered, a stable passage connecting the Gamma Quadrant to the Alpha Quadrant. Suddenly, new powers were exploring Dominion space. In early 2370, the Dominion made first official contact when Ferengi Grand Nagus Sek attempted to establish trade relations. But the real introduction came later, that year, when Commander Benjamin Sisko and Quark were captured by the Jem'Hadar. The message was clear: stay on your side of the anomaly. To emphasize the point, Jem'Hadar destroyed the Federation starship USS Odyssey and annihilated Bajoran colonies in the Gamma Quadrant. The suicide attack on the Odyssey shocked the Federation. They'd never faced an enemy with such fanatical devotion. The Federation pulled the USS Defiant out of storage and began preparing Deep Space Nine for war. But they didn't fully understand what they were facing. The Jem'Hadar weren't just soldiers. They were a military force, unlike anything the Alpha Quadrant had encountered. They didn't negotiate. They didn't retreat unless ordered. They didn't surrender unless their Vorta commanded it. And behind them stood the Founders, shapeshifters who could infiltrate any organization, replace any leader, and manipulate entire governments. The Dominion wasn't just a military threat, it was an existential one. For years, tensions simmered. The Obsidian Order and Tal Shire attempted to destroy the Founders in a preemptive strike and were annihilated. Founder infiltrators spread paranoia throughout the Alpha Quadrant. Then, in 2373, the Dominion formed an alliance with the Cardassian Union and openly declared war. The Dominion War lasted from 2373 to 2375 and was one of the bloodiest conflicts in galactic history. And at the center of every battle were the Jem'Hadar. But not all Jem'Hadar were the same. During the war, a new breed emerged, the Alphas. These Jem'Hadar were specifically bred in the Alpha Quadrant for combat against Federation, Klingon, and Romulan forces. The older Jem'Hadar from the Gamma Quadrant were called Gammas. The Alphas were considered superior, better adapted to Alpha Quadrant conditions, more aggressive, more effective. This created tension between Alpha and Gamma Jem'Hadar, with Alphas viewing their Gamma counterparts as inferior. The war tested the Jem'Hadar in ways they'd never been tested before. The Federation alliance fought with determination that shocked the Dominion. Losses mounted. White supplies became strained when a minefield cut off the Gamma Quadrant, forcing the Dominion to rely on production facilities in the Alpha Quadrant, including those operated by the Sauna. For the first time in Dominion history, the Jem'Hadar faced sustained, organized resistance that refused to break. The Klingons fought with honor and ferocity. The Romulans used cunning and advanced technology. The Federation combined both with unshakable moral conviction, and slowly, cracks began to form in Jem'Hadar certainty. Throughout the war, isolated incidents suggested that Jem'Hadar loyalty, while genetically programmed, wasn't absolutely unbreakable. In rocks and shoals, a group of Jem'Hadar were stranded on a planet with limited white supplies. Their Vorta, Kivan, was injured and dying. In desperation, he betrayed his own Jem'Hadar to Captain Sisko, offering to trade their lives for his own survival. The Jem'Hadar third, Ramataklan, learned of the betrayal, but followed orders anyway. When Sisko asked why, Ramataklan explained that he knew the Vorta had betrayed them, knew they were being sent to die, but obeying orders was what gave his life meaning. I am a Jem'Hadar. I am bred to fight, and if necessary, to die. It was tragic and profound, a being so thoroughly programmed that even knowing he was being sacrificed couldn't break his conditioning. But there was also dignity in it, a choice to find meaning in obedience, even when that obedience was being exploited. Even more remarkable was Gorniger, a Jem'Hadar commander who experienced a genetic mutation that freed him from white dependency. He didn't become violent or insane. He simply no longer needed the drug. Gorniger tried desperately to replicate this mutation in other Jem'Hadar, hopping to free them from the Founder's genetic leash. Dr. Bashir tried to help but failed. The mutation was random, unreplicable. Gorniger sent his men away rather than watch them die from white withdrawal, choosing mercy over the mission. His final fate remains unknown, but his existence proved something crucial. A Jem'Hadar free from white dependency could still choose to serve the Founders or choose not to. These moments were rare exceptions. The vast majority of Jem'Hadar fought with absolute loyalty until the war's bitter end. The Dominion War ended in 2375, when the female changeling, dying from a disease that was killing all the Founders, agreed to surrender in exchange for a cure. The final battle at Cardassian Prime was catastrophic. When Cardassian forces rebelled and joined the Federation alliance, the Founders ordered the Jem'Hadar to massacre Cardassian civilians as punishment. 800 million Cardassians died in hours, the Jem'Hadar following orders without hesitation, slaughtering civilians because their gods commanded it. It was the ultimate demonstration of what the Jem'Hadar were: weapons that killed whoever they were pointed at, incapable of moral judgment, programmed to obey unto genocide. When the female changeling ordered all Dominion forces to stand down, the Jem'Hadar obeyed instantly. Ships that moments before were fighting to the death simply stopped. Soldiers who would never surrender laid down their arms. The war was over because a Founder said it was over. And that was all the Jem'Hadar needed to know. The Treaty of Badger formally ended the war. Dominion forces withdrew to the Gamma Quadrant. But what happened to the Jem'Hadar after the war remains largely unknown in the Prime timeline. Some evidence suggests that Odo, who had returned to the Great Link to cure the Founders and share his experiences with solids, worked to reform Dominion practices. He created the Jem'Hadar Vanguard, a branch of Jem'Hadar loyal to him personally, and possibly freed from white dependency. The Vanguard concept appeared in Star Trek Online, where it's revealed that Odo personally oversaw their development, creating Jem'Hadar who could work alongside the Federation alliance against threats like the Hark. These Jem'Hadar retained their combat effectiveness, but were given choice, the ability to decide for themselves rather than blindly following orders. But the canonical fate of most Jem'Hadar after the war remains uncertain. Did they continue serving the Dominion? Were they freed from white dependency? Did the Founders, reformed by Odo's influence, give their created warriors actual lives rather than just existence? We don't know. And that uncertainty is perhaps fitting for a species created without agency, whose entire existence depended on the whims of beings they were programmed to worship as gods. So what does the Jem'Hadar teach us? On the surface, they're villains, implacable soldiers who commit atrocities without remorse, who value nothing except service to their gods, who killed billions without question or mercy. But look deeper, and the Jem'Hadar are victims. They didn't choose to be created. They didn't choose their genetic programming. didn't choose to need White or to worship the founders. Every aspect of their existence was decided by others before they emerged from their birthing chambers. The founders created the Jem'Hadar because they were afraid of being persecuted again, afraid of chaos, afraid of loss of control. That fear drove them to build slaves so perfect that even the slaves didn't know they were enslaved. And the terrible irony is that it worked. The Jem'Hadar were absolutely loyal, absolutely effective, and absolutely devoted. They never rebelled because they were incapable of conceiving rebellion. The founders had created the perfect solution to their fear of the solids, a species that would enforce order without ever threatening the founders themselves. But the cost was the creation of an entire species denied everything that makes life meaningful. The Jem'Hadar had no families, no art, no culture, no dreams beyond victory and death. They existed in a state of perpetual warfare, experiencing nothing except battle and brief moments of chemical dependency relief when they received their white. Even their sense of honor, the one thing that seemed truly theirs, was twisted by their programming. They took pride in combat because they were made to enjoy fighting. They valued strength because they were engineered to be strong. Their entire identity was a product of genetic manipulation. Compare them to the Bajorans, who were enslaved by the Cardassians, but maintained their culture, their faith, their sense of self. The Bajorans were oppressed from outside, brutal, horrific, but leaving their essential nature intact. The Jem'Hadar were oppressed from inside. The chains weren't around their bodies, but woven into their DNA. They couldn't resist their programming any more than a human can resist breathing. And unlike other enslaved species, most Jem'Hadar never even realized they were slaves. Gorniger, freed from white dependency, had a revelation. I've felt things I've never felt before. Doubt, uncertainty. I don't like these feelings. Freedom for a being created to serve was terrifying. It meant responsibility, choice, the possibility of making wrong decisions. Servitude was simpler, cleaner, more comfortable. That's perhaps the darkest lesson of the Jem'Hadar. You can enslave a species so completely that freedom becomes their greatest fear. The Jem'Hadar ask uncomfortable questions about free will, genetic engineering, and the ethics of creating sentient life for specific purposes. If you could create a being that genuinely wanted to serve, that found meaning and fulfillment in servitude, would that be acceptable? Does it matter if they're happy slaves? Star Trek's answer, delivered through Odo's attempts at reform and the Vanguard concept, is clear. Yes, it matters. Beings capable of thought deserve choice, even if exercising that choice is painful. A life of programmed contentment is still a diminished life. The Jem'Hadar were created to impose order on chaos. Instead, they became one of Star Trek's most poignant examples of what happens when we try to eliminate choice in pursuit of perfect control. The founders wanted security and got an army of tragic slaves who lived brief, violent lives, knowing nothing except service and death. Victory is life. But for the Jem'Hadar, life was never really theirs. Somewhere in the Gamma Quadrant, Jem'Hadar still emerge from birthing chambers, reaching combat readiness in 3 days, living maybe 20 years before dying in service to the founders. Whether those founders have learned anything from Odo, whether those Jem'Hadar have any chance at freedom, remains an open question, but their existence stands as a warning. Creating life with purpose is playing God, and gods, whether founders or anyone else, often fail to understand that their creations deserve more than just to fulfill the purpose for which they were made. The Jem'Hadar were born to serve and built to kill. They deserved better. They all deserved better.